What if I told you that one of the most peaceful and prosperous nations in the world is quietly wrestling with problems most outsiders never see? Switzerland is often painted as a flawless postcard. Snow-capped Alps, crystal lakes, luxury watches, and a banking system so strong it feels untouchable. But beneath that polished image lies a far more complex story. One filled with natural challenges, cultural tensions, and economic pressures that could surprise you. So let's dive deep into Switzerland, its breathtaking geography, its powerhouse economy, and its unique culture. And along the way, I'll ask you questions, because your perspective matters here. For example, would you trade stability and wealth for neutrality and tradition? Stick around and decide for yourself. Before we get started, let me know in the comments. Have you ever been to Switzerland, or is it still on your travel bucket list? Let's start off with the geographical marvels and hidden risks. At first glance, Switzerland looks like nature's masterpiece. Landlocked in the heart of Europe, it sits like a fortress surrounded by some of the continent's biggest players. Germany to the north, France to the west, Italy to the south, and Austria to the east. Despite being just a little smaller than the U.S. state of Virginia, Switzerland packs in some of the most dramatic landscapes on Earth. The Alps dominate the southern region, with jagged peaks that slice the sky, some soaring above 4,000 meters. These mountains aren't just for skiing postcards. They define Swiss life. They shape the climate, dictate travel, and guard Switzerland's famously secure position. The north has the Jura Mountains, rolling and forested, while the central plateau acts as a natural link between all corners of the country. This plateau, dotted with lakes like Geneva and Zurich, holds most of Switzerland's population and cities. But here's the twist most people miss. This beauty comes with danger. In 2024, severe storms triggered devastating floods in alpine valleys and parts of the Jura, damaging homes, farmlands, and infrastructure. Landslides and avalanches are constant risks, and climate change is pushing the glaciers back at alarming speed. The postcard landscape is under pressure, and Switzerland has to balance admiration for its natural wonders with the sobering reality of protecting its people. Now here's something that might surprise you. Switzerland isn't a uniform country. It's carved into 26 cantons, essentially mini-states, each with its own constitution, parliament, and even traditions. Dig deeper, and you'll find nearly 3,000 municipalities, from tiny alpine villages with fewer than 100 residents to sprawling cities like Zurich and Geneva. Some villages hold the title of city for historical reasons, even though they're smaller than many towns elsewhere. It's this mosaic of local identity that keeps Switzerland vibrant but also fragmented. And because of this decentralized structure, decisions that affect the environment or infrastructure can vary dramatically from one canton to the next. For example, some cantons push renewable energy hard, while others resist wind farms or solar fields in the name of preserving scenic views. That balance between modernization and tradition is at the heart of Swiss geography, both physically and politically. Quick question. I want to hear from you. Would you support building renewable projects even if they change the view of a pristine mountain? Drop a comment and let's see where people stand. But geography is only half the story. If the mountains and lakes make Switzerland look like a dream, its economy is what turns it into a global powerhouse. Yet here again, what outsiders imagine, endless banking riches and flawless prosperity, is only part of the truth. Because right now, cracks are starting to show, and those cracks could redefine what Switzerland looks like in the next decade. Okay, let's talk about the elephant in the room, which is its economic strengths and cracks. Switzerland, your TM's economy, is often described with one word: invincible. And on the surface, that AURTM's true. This is the land of precision watches, world-class pharmaceuticals, luxury tourism, and a banking sector that once seemed untouchable. But what if I told you that the very things that made Switzerland rich are now creating new vulnerabilities? Lead AURTM start with the basics. Switzerland AURTM's economy is built on three main pillars: agriculture, industry, and services. But don't AURTMT let the word agriculture fool you. AUR, less than 10% of the population, actually works in farming. The Swiss government supports this sector heavily to preserve rural life, but the truth is the country can AURTMT feed itself. Almost half of its food supply comes from imports. That dependency means Switzerland is deeply tied to global trade flows, AUR, and that EURTM's where the problems begin. Industry, on the other hand, is a beast. Roughly 40% of the workforce is employed here, producing everything from high-tech machines to metals, textiles, and of course those iconic Swiss watches. But here AURTM's the irony. The stronger Switzerland AURTM's currency, the harder it becomes for these industries to compete abroad. The Swiss franc has been soaring, which sounds good if you are URTM or vacationing abroad or importing goods. But for exporters, URTM's a nightmare. They, URTM, are selling in euros and dollars, but paying their bills in francs. Every upward tick of the currency squeezes their margins tighter. Now, let URTMs talk about services AEUR, the crown jewel. Banking, insurance, consulting, tourism, AEUR. This is where Switzerland shines. For decades, the Swiss banking system had an almost mythical reputation: secrecy, security, and stability. But that myth cracked wide open in recent years. The collapse of Credit Suisse in 2023 was more than just a financial story AEUR. It was a cultural shock. Suddenly, one of the biggest names in Swiss finance was gone, absorbed by UBS under government pressure. That merger might have saved the system in the short term, but it left Swiss citizens uneasy. If Credit Suisse could fall, what else is fragile beneath the surface? And fragility doesn't stop there. The housing market is flashing warning signs. Property values are sky-high, fueled by years of low interest rates and high demand. But economists worry about overvaluation. If the bubble bursts, the impact on Swiss households AEUR and the banks holding all those mortgages could be massive. Here, AEURTMs, where the story takes an even stranger turn. The Swiss National Bank, the very institution tasked with stability, has been cutting interest rates again, trying to keep the franc from choking exporters. But those cuts risk fueling the same housing bubble the AERTM are worried about. ETURTMs, a balancing act that feels almost impossible. And then there AEURTMs, the global factor. In 2025, US tariffs and trade tensions began hitting Switzerland harder than most people realize. This is a country that survives on exports AEUR, whether it's AEURTMs, watches heading to Asia, medical equipment going to Europe, or chocolate shipped worldwide. When major economies start raising barriers, Switzerland feels the chill almost immediately. So here AEURTMs, the paradox. Switzerland looks rich, stable, and untouchable. But behind the curtain, AEURTMs juggling an expensive currency, fragile exports, a housing bubble, and rising costs of healthcare and pensions for an aging population. The outside world still sees the mountain chalets and luxury brands AEUR, but inside the pressure is real. If you URTM made it this far, I want your take AEUR. Do you think Switzerland, URTM's wealth can protect it forever? Or are we looking at the start of a bigger problem? Comment your prediction below, but money only tells part of the story. To understand Switzerland, you need to understand its people AEUR and the culture that shapes how they live, work, and fight to protect traditions. Because while the economy is showing cracks, ITURTMs, the cultural debates that often spark the most heated arguments. And trust me, some of them are far stranger than UAURTMD expect. When people think of Switzerland, they imagine calm, clean streets, luxury trains gliding through valleys, and an economy so polished that problems barely exist. But let's break that illusion for a second. Because for many Swiss citizens, life under the surface is far more complicated. Take housing. On paper, Switzerland is rich, but finding an affordable apartment in Zurich, Geneva, or Basel can feel like winning the lottery. Prices have climbed relentlessly, fueled by high demand, foreign investment, and low interest rates that encourage borrowing. Even middle-class families are squeezed, sometimes paying more than half their income just to live near their jobs. That's not prosperity, that's pressure. And here's the kicker. Switzerland has some of the strictest rules on new construction, with local communities often voting against big housing projects to protect the character of their towns. On one hand, this preserves the postcard image outsiders love. On the other, it traps supply and pushes prices even higher. The Swiss dream of home ownership? For many, it's slipping further away each year. But housing isn't the only struggle. Jobs are shifting too. Switzerland's unemployment rate is low by global standards, but look closer and cracks appear. Traditional exporters, especially smaller manufacturers, are being squeezed by the strong franc and global tariffs. Some businesses are cutting staff, moving production abroad, or closing entirely. And when jobs vanish in small mountain towns, there isn't always another opportunity waiting around the corner. At the same time, new jobs are popping up in finance, IT, and high-tech sectors. But here's the catch. Not everyone can simply jump into those roles. Older workers or people in traditional industries often find themselves left behind. The gap between thriving urban professionals and struggling small-town workers is widening. Slowly, quietly, but undeniably. And then there's the cost of living. Switzerland consistently ranks as one of the most expensive places on Earth. Groceries, transportation, healthcare, everything carries a premium price tag. Sure, salaries are higher than average, but when insurance premiums climb each year and basic necessities eat away at income, even well-paid professionals feel the pinch. Speaking of healthcare, Switzerland's system is often praised for quality, but it comes with rising costs. Every resident is required to buy private health insurance, and premiums can skyrocket depending on age and region. For retirees living on fixed pensions, this is becoming a real problem. The country's aging population is only making the issue more urgent. Here's a reality check. In a recent survey, nearly half of Swiss citizens said they worried about whether they could maintain their standard of living over the next decade. Think about that. In one of the richest countries on the planet, people aren't sure if they can afford the future. But here's where it gets interesting. Switzerland has one of the world's most direct democracies. Citizens vote on everything, from tax reforms to whether solar panels should be installed in the Alps. That means frustrations over housing, jobs, or healthcare often spill directly into national referenda. It's democracy in its rawest form, but it also slows down big reforms. Because while one region may demand cheaper housing or more renewable energy, another may vote it down to preserve tradition. So while Switzerland's struggles might not look chaotic from the outside, inside the country, every issue is a balancing act. Prosperity exists, but it comes with constant tension. Between young and old, rural and urban, progress and tradition. Quick question for you. Would you rather live in a country with high salaries but sky-high costs, or a country with lower pay but cheaper living? Drop your choice below. I'm curious where most people stand. And if you thought money and housing were complicated, wait until you see the cultural side of Switzerland, because this is where things get emotional. From cowbells sparking village debates to international controversies over Eurovision, Switzerland's culture is as fiercely defended as its borders. And sometimes those cultural battles get heated. Let's talk about its culture, values, and social tensions. If Switzerland's economy is a balancing act, its culture is a tug of war. This is a country famous for neutrality, stability, and consensus. But when it comes to traditions, identity, and values, the debates can get surprisingly fierce. Let's start with one of the strangest examples: cowbells. Yes, cowbells. In the small town of Arvangen, new residents recently complained about the noise from traditional cowbells, saying it disrupted their peace and sleep. To outsiders, it might sound ridiculous. Who moves to a Swiss village without expecting cows? But for locals, this was no laughing matter. The bells aren't just noise, they're heritage. They represent centuries of alpine farming life passed down from generation to generation. The controversy blew up into national headlines, turning a simple sound into a symbol of cultural resistance. And this isn't an isolated story. Across Switzerland, traditions are fiercely guarded, sometimes against modern pressures, sometimes against global influences. Direct democracy, where citizens vote on nearly every issue, gives people the power to defend these traditions, whether it's rejecting massive solar projects in the Alps to protect scenic beauty, or debating whether Eurovision should be hosted in Basel with taxpayer money. That Eurovision debate, by the way, became a cultural flashpoint. Some saw it as a chance for Switzerland to shine on a global stage, attracting tourism and celebrating diversity. Others called it a waste of money and an insult to conservative values. When politics mixes with culture here, the results can be surprisingly intense. But culture isn't just about cowbells and song contests, it's about identity. Switzerland is one of the most multilingual countries in the world, with 4 official languages: German, French, Italian, and Romansh. Each language region has its own media, traditions, and even political priorities. In fact, you could argue that Switzerland isn't one culture at all. It's 4 cultures living under one flag. That makes unity a constant balancing act. Now add immigration into the mix. Switzerland has one of the highest percentages of foreign-born residents in Europe. On the one hand, this diversity fuels the economy, fills labor shortages, and adds to the country's international flavor. On the other, it sparks tension in rural areas where locals fear their traditions are being diluted. This friction often shows up in referenda, where citizens vote on laws around migration, citizenship, and integration. And here's the fascinating part. Despite being a modern global hub, Switzerland still clings to neutrality and a sense of separateness. While the rest of Europe debates military alliances and foreign policy, the Swiss stick to their long-standing refusal to pick sides. It's a point of pride, but also a source of criticism. Some argue that neutrality allows Switzerland to profit from global turmoil without taking responsibility. Others insist it's exactly what has kept the country safe and prosperous. But neutrality has cultural consequences too. It reinforces the idea of Switzerland as a place apart, where tradition, independence, and local identity outweigh global conformity. That's why something as simple as a cowbell or a mountain view can turn into a national argument. Here's a question for you. Do you think traditions should always be protected even if they clash with modern lifestyles? Or should societies adapt and let some old customs go? Share your thoughts below. I want to see how divided people really are on this. But culture isn't just about today. It's about where Switzerland is heading. And right now, the country is facing debates that could redefine its future. From digital identity cards to stricter bank rules after the Credit Suisse collapse, Switzerland's next choices may be even more controversial than its past ones. Switzerland's image may be timeless, but its choices today are anything but. Beneath the postcard surface, debates are raging that could reshape how the country looks, feels, and even operates in the decades ahead. One of the hottest topics, digital identity. In 2025, Swiss citizens were called to vote on whether the government should introduce a new digital ID system. For some, this was common sense. A modern, secure way to handle everything from banking to healthcare to travel. But for others, it sparked alarm bells. In a country that prizes privacy and independence, many saw digital ID as a slippery slope toward surveillance and loss of freedom. Privacy groups warned about data misuse, while younger voters argued Switzerland risked falling behind in the digital race. That clash, tradition versus modernization, echoed across the country, proving that even a simple piece of technology can become a national identity crisis here. And speaking of identity, let's talk about finance. After the Credit Suisse collapse, Switzerland's reputation as the fortress of global banking took a hit. Regulators scrambled to restore trust, tightening oversight on UBS, the giant that absorbed Credit Suisse. New rules are being pushed that would force banks to keep thicker safety cushions and stricter crisis plans. On the surface, this looks like stability. But critics worry the rules could slow down innovation and make Switzerland less attractive to global investors. Imagine that. The very thing that once defined Switzerland's global brand now under threat from within. But the financial sector isn't the only battleground. Switzerland's export economy is under pressure like never before. In 2025, new tariffs from the US and shifting trade patterns in Europe began cutting into Swiss profits. Exporters, from luxury watchmakers to pharmaceutical giants, felt the pinch almost immediately. For a nation that depends on selling abroad, this was more than just an economic story. It was a national concern. Could Switzerland remain competitive in a world that's becoming more protectionist? Then there's the environmental dilemma. Switzerland wants to meet renewable energy goals, but not everyone agrees on how. Massive solar projects in the Alps were recently voted down by local communities worried about spoiling the pristine landscape. On one side, environmentalists warn that climate change is melting glaciers and making floods more frequent. On the other, villagers argue, what's the point of fighting climate change if you destroy the very beauty you're trying to protect? It's a classic Swiss paradox, progress versus preservation. And while we're talking paradoxes, let's not forget immigration and identity. Switzerland thrives on migrant labor, but referenda over the past decade show growing unease about integration. Some communities worry about losing their cultural character, while businesses argue they can't survive without foreign workers. These debates often split urban and rural areas, French-speaking and German-speaking regions, young and old voters. Here's the bigger picture. Switzerland is standing at a crossroads. The decisions it makes now about digital privacy, banking regulation, trade, energy, and migration will define whether it stays the wealthy, neutral success story the world admires, or whether cracks in the system widen into something more serious. Which of these issues do you think is the biggest threat to Switzerland's future? Digital ID, fragile banks, trade wars, or climate change? Comment your choice. I'll be reading what people think. But here's the thing. Even with all these pressures, Switzerland still holds something rare, a reputation for resilience. And if history tells us anything, it's that this small nation has a knack for turning crises into comebacks. So let's take one last look at what the future might hold and why Switzerland's story is far from finished. So after all this, What's next for Switzerland? On the surface, the future seems uncertain. Trade wars threaten exports. Banking reforms shake a centuries-old reputation. Climate change is melting glaciers faster than ever. And the country's fierce debates, from digital IDs to solar panels, reveal a society constantly wrestling with how much to change and how much to preserve. But if there's one thing history proves, it's that Switzerland is built on paradox. It's a tiny nation with global influence, a land of farmers and bankers, of ancient traditions and cutting-edge innovation. It manages to be both fiercely local and deeply international at the same time, and somehow that paradox has always been its secret weapon. Think about it. In a world where countries often choose sides, Switzerland thrives by refusing to. In an era when political divisions tear nations apart, Switzerland still bets on direct democracy, letting the people decide, even if it means chaos. And when crises hit, whether it's banking scandals, refugee surges, or cultural clashes, the country doesn't collapse. It adjusts, slowly, stubbornly, but effectively. That resilience is why so many people trust Switzerland with their money, their businesses, even their safety. And it's why, despite all the debates and challenges, Switzerland's future may be more secure than it looks. But the real question isn't whether Switzerland can adapt. History shows it can. The question is, how much of its identity will it be willing to sacrifice in the process? Will it stay the Switzerland of neutrality, privacy, and tradition? Or will it embrace a more globalized, digitized, and open identity, even if it means losing some of what makes it unique? Final question, what do you think Switzerland should choose? Tradition or transformation? Drop your answer in the comments and let's see which side the world is on.